All right, 10:33. I suggest we get started. We've got 136 attendees out of 260 registrants. So they will continue to flow in, but I've got a bit of an introduction to do anyway before Dr. Mischley gets underway with her presentation. So let's start that now. Okay, good morning and Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to PD Active's fourth online speaker forum. My name is Todd Morrish, and I will be your host and moderator this morning with assistance from Sue Steinbleck. This morning, we welcome all of our visitors, including folks from Parkinson's Network of Mount Diablo, or PNMD, as well as those coming to us via the Stanford Parkinson's Network, and of course, our own PD Active community here in Berkeley and Oakland. We hope you are all staying safe and healthy and yet still active and socially engaged to the degree we can. So before I introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Laurie Mischley, a little bit of housekeeping. This will take just a moment. First, and importantly, a plug for PD Active programs. PD Active has, of course, embraced this new model of digital program delivery, as you've seen if you've attended any of our other online events. Well, we also make it easy for our members to access our great programs and classes virtually as well. Besides PD Active support groups, which are famous, by the way, we also offer many other classes and programs for people with Parkinson's. There's Tai Chi and yoga and Pilates and meditation. And there's voice and singing and boxing and dance, all geared toward PD folks. I have participated in many of these myself, and they're very helpful and enjoyable. If you have tried one or more of these, we ask you to tag a friend or family member to join you on your next session. Please check out the calendar link in the upper right-hand corner of the pdactive.org homepage, and we will paste that URL into the Zoom chat tool now, and then do spread the word. Right now, you are all on mute. And by the way, I see a very active chat discussion going on already before we even got started. Insightful comments on puppies that are out there and my drum set, which is cool. I like that. So sorry that you're all on mute. You will only be able to see myself and Dr. Mischley and Sue Steinbleck. The rest of you are invisible, such as the functionality of a Zoom webinar. We do have a large group of attendees today, as mentioned. As of this morning, we topped 260. Actually, those are registrants, and the attendees are growing as every moment. So having you on mute will help make for a fluid presentation without a lot of distractions. Additionally, if you are new to Zoom's webinar format, you will not see other attendees in the Zoom window. So importantly, this webinar is being recorded, and we will make a copy of Dr. Mischley's presentation and the recording of the whole presentation available on PD Active on the pdactive.org website and or our YouTube channel in the next few days. So we'll get a link out to that, to all of the registrants, as well as in our newsletter coming up soon. You may submit questions when you have them using the Q&A feature of your Zoom application. We may take a Q&A break midway through Dr. Mischley's presentation if the opportunity presents itself. And then, of course, we have reserved ample Q&A time at the end of the presentation. Sue and I will use the Zoom chat feature, as you all have begun to do, to relay information to you regarding the presentation, like these links that I reference. But we prefer you use the Q&A tool for questions to Dr. Mischley. That way we can go to one place. So I've already received a few questions by email prior to this morning's session. And then you can submit any others through the Q&A feature in Zoom. If for any reason Dr. Mischley or I get disconnected from this webinar, which I highly doubt, please be patient and do not disconnect or leave the meeting if possible for a few minutes as we try to get reconnected. It is possible that Sue may take over as host if I am disconnected. PD Active depends on donations to bring events like this to our members free of charge, and we remain very grateful for your contributions. Thank you. If you have not had a chance yet to make the suggested registration donation of $10 for this speaker forum, we will paste that link in the chat feature now. Sue, are you able to do that for us, or shall I do it? Let me do that real quick. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, that's in the chat window. So prior to starting her presentation, Dr. Mischley has asked that she get to know a little bit about you. So please answer these several poll questions as quickly as you can as I post them so the doctor can see the results of these polls and get started. If you prefer to not answer any of these questions, of course, merely just close the windows as they pop up. Okay, give me a second and I'm going to launch the first poll question. All right, there will be 6 of them. I'll do these for about 15 to 30 seconds each, and we'll move on just so we're not taking too much time away from the presentation. First one is, what is your relationship to Parkinson's disease? In fact, it looks like all of the questions might have been posted. So go ahead and answer those if you can quickly. Here come the responses. You can't see those yet, probably, Dr. Mischley, so I'll publish them in a second when they get answered. Good, people are active, thank you. We're up to 167 attendees. Welcome, everyone. We're taking a poll quickly right now to give Dr. Mischley a bit of a profile of the attendees and visitors here this morning. So answer those questions as you see them on your screen. Over 100 have responded. We'll go a few more seconds here and then we'll publish. Looks like a couple of you might be struggling with answering them, so we'll give it another minute. Okay, that should do it. That's over 120 or so respondees. I'll end that poll and share the results, and we can just scan those quickly, Dr. Mischley. So are you seeing those now on your screen?
Yep.
Okay, so you see that the vast majority of us have PD. Some are caregivers or care partners. Most inside of 5 years diagnosis. Age range, you see there. Most between 61 and 70. Here's one of your good, important questions that you wanted to know in advance. Any change in diet? I didn't get too specific or particular in the answer options, but some have made some change, so that's good. We can probably go deeper into that as you go through your presentation. Integrative care team, mostly not. And then we also were curious about everybody's technical proficiency around the technical aspects of neuroscience. Some say
I might give myself a low, so there we go.
All right, so I hope that helps. I'll stop sharing that and finish up my little intro blurb and we will dive right in. Great. Now, without further delay, PediActive is pleased to introduce to you Dr. Laurie Mischley. Dr. Mischley studied naturopathic medicine at Bastyr University and epidemiology and nutritional sciences at the University of Washington, where she's got a PhD. Her work is focused on identifying the national nutritional requirements unique to individuals with neurodegenerative diseases. She has published on, and here I'm going to butcher some of these, but coenzyme Q10, lithium, and glutathione deficiency in Parkinson's disease. As a clinical researcher, she has worked with the FDA, the NIH, or the National Institute of Health, and the Michael J. Fox Foundation to administer intranasal glutathione, or INGSH, to individuals with PD, and attempting to determine whether INGSH boosts brain glutathione and improves health. Dr. Mischley maintains a clinical practice at Seattle Integrative Medicine focused on nutrition and neuropathical health. Here, I'm going to post that link in our chat window right now, Dr. Mischley, so we get a little bit of coverage for you out there. Great. And Dr. Mischley, welcome and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to our community today.
Thank you.
I'll hand the figurative mic over to you now, and please feel free to either expand on that intro or just dive into your presentation, and I will mute myself until I find any need to say anything for you.
I think I will just dive in. It says that I can't share my screen. You have that disabled.
Okay.
And I really appreciate the questions that are already starting to come in. I'll try to get to as many, if not all, as I can.
Great. You should be able to share now.
Great. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, well, your founder, Adam Mizok, is a friend of mine, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have this larger audience and talk to all of you, because truly, ultimately, my goal is to reach as many people as humanly possible with the common goal, shared goal of making Parkinson's reversible and preventable. So everything that I'm going to be talking to you about today falls under that heading. That is my personal agenda here. My disclosures are here. I don't think there's anything that's going to come up. There have been a couple questions about the dogs. I started a Parkinson's detection thing where I've trained dogs to smell Parkinson's. There have been a couple questions about that, but none of the rest of this stuff should pose a conflict of interest. And I wasn't planning on talking about the dogs much today anyway. But before I dive in, here's what I want to set the stage talking about the difference between treating symptoms and slowing or stopping progression. Every single day I meet people who tell me they are taking this or doing that for their Parkinson's. And before I even dive into my research or what the evidence is saying, I want to make sure that every person watching is crystal clear that these are two very different goals. Just because something improves your symptoms doesn't mean it does anything for your rate of progression, the slope at which this disease progresses. It may actually even make progression worse. It may help symptoms short term while accelerating the underlying process. The opposite is true. There may be a medicine that actually stops the disease from progression, but comes with horrible side effects. And so when, as a researcher, we talk about, I am working on Parkinson's disease, very early on in whatever study we are embarking on, we have to get crystal clear. Are you trying to hide some symptoms, or are you trying to stop progression? And it's much, much, much easier to do research related to hiding symptoms than it is slowing progression. We'll talk about that. In the 200 years that we have known about Parkinson's disease, there is not a single FDA-approved therapy to slow, stop, or reverse the rate of progression. So these are just kind of two graphical representations. These will make a little more sense in a minute, but here's somebody whose symptoms improved for a while, but the progression continued as you would expect Parkinson's progression to continue. As opposed to this person over here on the right, had no symptom improvement whatsoever, but has a complete lack of progression. So everybody comes to me wanting to know, does nutrition improve Parkinson's? And what we know is that there have been a few studies now that say what you eat over the middle part of your life, your 20s, 30s, 40s, seems to be associated with whether or not you are diagnosed with Parkinson's in your 50s, 60s, and 70s. This data comes from the Nurses' Health Study, the Physician Follow-Up Study. These decade-long, tens of thousands of participant studies that look at behaviors over the course of one's life, and then watch to see who gets diagnosed with Parkinson's. And then they are able to look backwards and say, wow, they were having a lot of cereal for breakfast and eating a lot of fast food at dinner. And so those studies have very clearly and quite consistently shown us that the more red meat, processed meat, deli meats, dairy, refined grains, this is breads, pastas, things like that, sweets, well water, and pesticides a person consumes or is exposed to over the course of their life, the more likely they are to get a diagnosis of Parkinson's. While people who, the highest consumers are of fruits, vegetables, legumes, fish, coffee, and tea are least likely to get a diagnosis of Parkinson's. And so what your neurologist deals with all day long are people coming in and asking questions. Well, if this is associated with an increased risk of progression, should I stop? Should I stop eating red meat and dairy? Should I give up sweets? Should I move so I'm not on a well anymore? Do I have to buy organic? But where the field has been stuck is we don't actually have much data that speaks to what happens to a person from the point of progression on. So just because something is associated with progression doesn't necessarily mean it's associated with slowing the disease. And I know it seems like common sense. Well, if these things are associated with an increased risk of diagnosis, it only stands to reason that they are likely to kind of make the disease progress faster. It is a natural place for people to want to jump to. And the example I like to give is, I will often in live groups say, how many of you believe washing your hands will decrease your risk of getting a flu, right? And all the hands go up. And then I say, okay, once you already have the flu, how many times do you have to wash your hands to make it go away? And just because there's something that tips over that first domino, that plants a seed, that incites something, doesn't necessarily mean that those same events are going to perpetuate it. And so scientifically, you can't assume that these things are going to protect the disease from progressing and that these are going to accelerate progression. So a lot of the research that I have been working on is trying to answer that question. This is becoming maybe fuzzier as time goes on, because what we now understand is the point of diagnosis is a little bit arbitrary. The point at which the neurologist says you have Parkinson's is occurring 10 or 20 years into your disease. And so more and more we are starting to think that some of these things that are associated with decreasing the risk of diagnosis might actually be coming into play. We now know that 10 plus years before you get diagnosed, most people's disease has already begun. They've started to lose their sense of smell. They've started to act out their dreams. They've had memory issues, anxiety, erectile dysfunction. These things are all occurring very, very early in disease and often not being attributed to Parkinson's because they haven't yet developed those motor symptoms to bring the doctor's attention to Parkinson's. So motor symptoms get the limelight in this disease, right? When we talk about Parkinson's, all the attention is on motor. And I would actually argue it's been a pretty big distraction in the Parkinson's field in terms of trying to answer the questions about progression. By the time somebody has motor symptoms, they've already had this disease for decades, right? And so we are getting to it late. More and more, it's kind of looking like the non-motor symptoms might be where we can impact the greatest benefit or have the greatest impact. And they might kind of bring our attention to a group of patients that we could help earlier. But before I dive in, I want to say I don't expect that a lot of you will change your diet and experience a tremendously robust improvement in motor symptoms. I want to set realistic expectations. You cannot go have a salad for dinner and watch your tremor go away. It's not like taking dopamine. Motor symptoms are caused by a lack of dopamine, and we have very, very good medicines to supplement that dopamine. Where I expect the greatest benefit from diet is going to be in non-motor symptoms, but I do want to say that diet can make some of your motor symptoms worse. So before I get into how I really think we might be able to slow this disease, I do want to make sure that all of you are aware that levodopa, L-dopa is essentially just an amino acid, and dietary protein is just a string of amino acids. So anything that you eat with protein, whether it's a plant-based protein, animal-based protein, Any dietary protein, when it gets to your stomach, it's going to break down into amino acids. It's going to fill those amino acid receptors. And when you take your medicine, there's nowhere for the medicine to go. All those receptors are plugged up. And so one of the biggest hurdles that people overlook is how much their food is getting in the way of their medicines working. There are a couple strategies. Here's a hint. How do you know if you're one of those people? If your morning dose works better than the rest of your doses. If you say my morning dose is the best, after that, it's kind of hit or miss. That's a big clue. People who will sometimes say after a meal, especially a big meal, I need to go lay down, take a nap. That could be a clue. I know that many of you were told at diagnosis, take your meds 30 minutes before or 60 minutes after a meal or a protein containing meal. I'm here to tell you that is very often not enough. If you're having cucumbers and hummus, there's a lot of protein in hummus, but because it's all blended up and it's plant-based, it tends to pass through you pretty quickly. An hour probably is long enough for you to, after eating hummus, for you to be able to take your meds. If you have eggs or a chunk of meat, it would be very, very unlikely that 60 minutes is long enough for that to have passed through your gut. And so the composition of the protein, how much protein, if you are constipated, if you are stressed, will all interfere with how well your meds are working. And so for people, what I encourage people to do, just to find out, are you one of these people for whom your meals are interfering with your meds? Do your own 4-day experiment, and to the extent that you are able, avoid all protein for 4 days. We have a sample menu. I might be able to post it someplace. A very generous dietitian made it up for us, and it's not intended to be a sustainable diet. It's just some ideas as to if you were to try and avoid protein for 4 days, just to give you and your body a chance to see how well the meds would work if not for the protein. And then after people do a low protein diet for a few days, by day 3 or 4, a lot of people are kind of like, you've got to be kidding. You've got to be kidding. My meds work twice as well as they have been. I didn't realize 2 scrambled eggs for breakfast was messing with my meds all day. So once you kind of experience success, what I will often have people do is try to save your protein for the evening meal. Have a low protein breakfast, a low protein lunch, kind of clear the path for the meds to work all day long. You can have an active life, run your errands, get your exercise in, and then when it's downtime, you're going to be sitting around reading a book, watching TV. You're not doing anything that active. Most people like to save their dietary protein for their evening meal. I have some people who have trouble sleeping, and the protein at dinner will really interfere with their meds and make it harder for them to sleep. And they would actually rather do it at lunch and have a period where their meds don't work at lunch. But this is something that I do very specifically with people. But I don't want anybody overlooking how impactful protein combining with meds can be. The other thing that people need to keep in mind is that levodopa interferes for sure with folate uptake in utilization and probably B12 as well. We have known this for a very, very long time. The longer you are on levodopa and the more levodopa you are on, the more evidence we have of folate deficiency and B12 deficiency in 1 or 2 studies. And the way we know that is something in your body called homocysteine goes up. If homocysteine levels are elevated, it means you are deficient in either B6, B12, or folate. And in Parkinson's disease, it is almost always folate or B12. So I am a huge advocate of people getting on medication early, staying optimally medicated. I want you on levodopa. This isn't a reason to avoid levodopa. But I am saying that another place where nutrition really comes into play in Parkinson's disease is the medicine that most of you are using is interfering with your nutritional status. And so once a year, I'm asking everybody to make sure that they get their homocysteine level checked. We know that the longer you are on levodopa and the higher doses you are on, the higher your homocysteine level is. If you have Parkinson's disease and your homocysteine level is higher than an 11, that is associated with a faster progressing disease and an increased risk of dementia. Homocysteine elevations are associated with dementia across the board, but it's even more severe in Parkinson's disease. Levodopa can interfere with, can contribute to constipation in some people. And when you're constipated, your meds don't work, you're not eating, it's hard, you don't have the same appetite. So that's another place I want people to be aware of of nutrition, Parkinson's. And two little hacks. I think I'm not going to get into CDP choline here today, but I will tell you that CDP choline, otherwise known as citicoline, is an over-the-counter nutritional supplement. It's a pharmaceutical drug, I believe, in Asia or Europe. But here in the US, it's an over-the-counter supplement. And there have been 4, 5, 6 studies now that show that if you take CDP choline within a month, it will make all of your levodopa 30 to 50% stronger. They don't know if it makes you grow new dopamine receptors. They're not really sure what the mechanism of action is, but many of you are cranking up your levodopa doses. You're hesitant, you need more, but you're hesitant to take more levodopa. You're taking entacapone or some of these other things trying to get more bang for your buck. And I just want to let you know that there is a very effective nutritional way to enhance dopaminergic meds that I think is being underutilized. And another neat, simple hack is 60% of people with Parkinson's disease do not have enough stomach acid. And not only is stomach acid required to digest your food, it's also required to activate and digest your medications. And so to supplement this low stomach acid, they've done 2 studies now, one where they had patients with Parkinson's take their levodopa with 30 mils of vitamin C. 30 mils of lemon juice, which is a good sized lemon. It's a full lemon's worth. I just measured it the other day. It's about 3 tablespoons. 30 mils of lemon juice or 500 milligrams of vitamin C, powdered ascorbic acid. It can't be the buffered kind. It has to actually have the acid in it. But you can take your meds with a little bit of acid, either as lemon juice or vitamin C, and get, I think one study showed 25% improvement in levodopa bioavailability, and the other study showed a 30%. So that's not an insignificant boost by just taking your meds with a little bit of acid. So I just wanted to make sure that we don't skip over, not all nutrition comes from food. That's going to be something I come back to towards the end of this talk. As I already said, low stomach acid, also called hypochlorhydria, is pretty common in Parkinson's disease. Clues that you might be affected: you're losing weight, you don't have much of an appetite. When you eat, you seem to get full easily, and you have an erratic response to meds. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And here are the references for those of you who want to go learn more about those lemon juice, vitamin C, levodopa studies. All right, so I think this is the question I probably get asked the most, is about diet and progression. I want to do something before I dive into that. Let me just talk about the ketogenic diet, because that question always comes up. There was a very, very small study. I think they may be both in Australia. The second study was definitely Australia or New Zealand, but a few docs did a small pilot study, less than 10 people in this study. And what they did find was that there was an improvement in non-motor symptoms over the 8 to 12 weeks that people were in ketosis. Specifically non-motor symptoms that benefited: urinary symptoms, pain, fatigue, less daytime sleepiness, and people were cognitively sharper. The problem with ketogenic diets is that there are a lot of side effects. People tend to lose weight, they have a loss of appetite, and they tend to be highly restrictive diets. There are a lot of things you can't eat. It interferes with your social life a bit. It's just hard to go out to eat with friends if you're trying to stay in ketosis, that kind of psychosocial stressors. So even though I think there is a lot of potential, and I do think that the research surrounding ketones having some neuroprotective potential, is exciting, there are some really impractical reasons that I'm not a big fan of ketogenic diets in Parkinson's, and largely that comes down to how restrictive they are. I don't need people losing any more weight, and I don't need any more loss of appetite. The side effects outweigh the benefits for me. But there is this emerging science about calorie restriction and intermittent fasting and timed eating. And what I will often tell patients is, I don't want you to reduce the number of calories that you get in a day, but if you can make sure to go 12 to 14 hours each night with no calories coming in, kind of Keep all of your eating to a 10 or 12-hour period during the day. So if the goal is to stop eating about 3 hours before bed. So if you go to bed at 10, you want to have stopped consuming food by about 7, and then 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. you don't eat calories. You can have tea with nothing in it. You can have black coffee, but nothing that has calories. So that is one emerging way to get some of the benefits of ketogenic diets without the side effects. So what we know is that in Parkinson's disease, people who are malnourished, malnutrition is very common in Parkinson's, and among people with Parkinson's who are malnourished, they are more likely to be constipated, depressed, they're more likely to have anxiety, apathy, dementia, and dystonia. So this is just me making a case. I mean, we hear the word malnutrition and we think of people who have food scarcity. And I think what I want to convey here is many of you are currently malnourished. You may even be overweight, but you could still be malnourished. Just because you're putting calories in your body doesn't mean that you are getting the nutrition that you need. Just because you are putting nutritious food in your mouth doesn't mean that you are absorbing it. Many of you are eating organic foods made, really high-end quality intake. But because of malabsorption issues, you're not digesting and absorbing those nutrients and you're still malnourished. So don't think just because you're eating, you're not at risk of malnutrition. That's very, very untrue. Okay, so this is what you want to know. Can I change my diet and have it change my progression? This is really the million-dollar question. So this is the study that I've been doing. This will be the 8th year that we have been doing this study. And what we have set out to do is answer the question, among people who have already been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, does it matter what they do? Is there any action in their lifestyle, something that they can change or modify that seems to be influencing how this disease progresses? And before I got my first set of data back, I made a promise to myself that I would go into this with no bias. I mean, my joke was, I don't care if it turns out that everybody who's not progressing has a pet turtle. I will tell you all to go get a pet turtle. Like, it doesn't matter to me if it makes sense or not. What I wanted to do is see if I could find the success stories. And when I say that about the pet turtle, or it's something far-fetched, one of my favorite stories is that 3 million people died of scurvy. That is 3 million deaths attributable to scurvy. And then we discovered that you could cure scurvy with limes. And for 200 years, the entire time that we have known about Parkinson's, for 200 years, we used limes to cure scurvy. And then we discovered ascorbic acid, the vitamin C molecule. So right now, the world that we live in would not fund me. I could not do a study on limes without first having discovered ascorbic acid. We are in this very, very molecular, evidence-based way of thinking about science, where we can, first comes our mechanistic understanding, and then we hope to come up with a therapy. And what I wanted to do is flip that whole idea on its head and say, clearly, we're not getting very far with understanding the molecular mechanisms, right? We keep throwing millions and millions and millions and decades into this, and we don't understand this disease. It is stupid for us to wait until we understand this disease to come up with therapies. What if we just cast a wide net and look for the people who have Parkinson's who are doing unusually well 10 and 20 and 30 years after their diagnosis? See if we can find some things that they have in common, and see if everyone starts doing those things, if everybody starts doing better too. I mean, that was kind of the oversimplified approach I was taking here. The model is called a positive deviance model. I did not invent it. It's actually a nutrition, it came from Tufts University, and they used it to study malnourished kids in third world countries. But it's a brilliant model, and it had just never been applied to neurodegenerative disease. And so I thought I'd take that model and apply it to Parkinson's, and it's been working really well. So before we could dive into this, we had to get clear on how we were going to measure Parkinson's severity and how to measure diet. And that's tough because people do not remember what kind of food they don't report when they're standing over the stove cooking and take a couple bites of what they're preparing, or they walk through the grocery store and sample something, or there's mindless snacking people do. And it's really hard to assess food. Best case scenario, we're about 70% accurate in all dietary studies. Any study that you will ever see on diet, at best, is about 70% accurate. So that's not, dietary measurements in general are not that impressive. But it's all we have. So for this study, to meet the needs of this study, we built a new outcome measure. It's called the PRO-PD. I would love every one of you, the URL is down here in the bottom left. Every one of you should know your PRO-PD score. And the more you know it, the more useful it becomes, because you get a sense of how much your disease fluctuates and how your scoring of yourself fluctuates. But what we know is the average person at diagnosis has a score of about 580 and gets worse at 38 points per year. Every one of these green dots is a real person in this study. Thank you to every single person here today on this webinar that is enrolled in this study. You made this possible. So all of these green dots are a real person, and the average person is 580, progresses at about 38 points per year. My goal, what I'm calling success, is everybody's score is a 0. Right? So the way this scale works there are 33 very common symptoms in Parkinson's: depression, apathy, anxiety, fatigue, tremor, rising from a seated position, balance, all kinds of stuff. And we ask, over the last 7 days, how severe has the symptom been? If the answer is, oh, I've been super healthy, not a problem at all, you click over here on the left. If it's been debilitating this week, you click over on the right, and someplace in between. And it's turned out to be actually a very, very useful score. One of the things that I am most struck by as we started to get familiar with this rating scale, and familiar, before we could go on with the study, we had to ask, is this a legitimate way of looking at the disease? Does this accurately measure Parkinson's severity? And one of the most striking things from the get-go is the incongruence between how patients describe the disease and how physicians describe the disease. When you ask doctors what is Parkinson's, you're often to hear tremor, rigidity, hunched posture. The motor symptoms are what people talk about. When we surveyed 2,500 people with Parkinson's, it is the fatigue, the impaired handwriting, the bad sleep, the memory stuff, the muscle cramps that highlighted that most people complained about. And so one of my goals here is, I think that we really need to redefine this disease. I mean, this has been a provider-defined disease for 200 years. And their patient-centered research is kind of this emerging buzzword where we're starting to look at patient-centered outcomes. And it is time in Parkinson's disease for the control to come from a patient-centered perspective. The medicines that we have been working on tirelessly and investing in heavily over these last few decades are not targeting the things that are the symptoms that are affecting you all most. And so I would love to see over the next few years, patients kind of contribute to the redefinition of this disease, where, there's no question in the last 10, 15 years, the respect for non-motor aspects of Parkinson's disease has grown tremendously, but there's a lot further to go. I think many of you have gone into a physician's office, had your entire visit, and not even touched the non-motor aspects of this disease. Too often, it's this mechanical adjusting your meds, making sure your motor symptoms are cared for, your meds are optimized, and your enough to take care of motor symptoms, while non-motor stuff often goes ignored. And that's something that I hope this scale helps us overcome, and a call to action for this community. As you can see, according to our scale, our data, 2/3 of the symptoms that people deal with are non-motor from the get-go, from the very beginning and the whole way through. Non-motor symptoms make up about 2/3 of this disease. And realize part of that may be because we have such good medicines to hide motor symptoms. It might be that the motor symptoms would be worse if we didn't have levodopa. I expect that we're true. I expect that if we did not have levodopa, this blue line would be a lot higher. You know, part of what you're seeing here is we've come up with really good medicines that decrease the motor symptoms. We don't have good medicines to decrease the non-motor symptoms. So here's a textbook chapter I recently wrote called Nutrition and Non-Motor Symptoms. That's available on the web someplace. And so the bolus of what I want to talk to you about today are the results of what we're seeing here. What I set out to ask is, okay, I'm not going to get into the statistics of it all, but I told you every one of these green dots is a real person with Parkinson's. The fact that these dots are all over the place speaks to something called heterogeneity. Y'all are all over the map. Some people are in a wheelchair a year or two after diagnosis. Some of you are water skiing 20 years after diagnosis, right? Like, it is a nightmare to try and figure out whether a blue pill or a red pill or 1 milligram or 2 milligrams slows Parkinson's progression, because there is nothing uniform. A double-blind placebo-controlled trial is designed to have two identical cohorts, and the only difference between them is a blue pill or a red pill, but they are otherwise identical. That has proved to be something we can't do in this disease because there's so much diversity. There's so much diversity in this field that when we give you a red pill and a blue pill, there are still 300 other variables that we can't seem to control for. So what I set out to do was to use the heterogeneity, the diversity among you, to our advantage. Let you all be you. Go do your experiments. Try what you're going to try. Some of you will start exercising. Some of you will go vegan. Some of you will say, you know, let's just have a good time. Life is short. I just wanted to figure out who were the success stories, and are these folks doing something different than these folks? Got the drum set. This is where I need the drum roll, right? Okay, so before I go on, this is my caveat here. Just because two things go together doesn't mean one caused the other, right? People that wear pantyhose are more likely to get breast cancer, right? It's not because pantyhose cause breast cancer, it's just women are more likely to be in both groups, right? And so just because two things go together, I am not at any point here saying, if you go home and do this, it will cause that. We're not there yet with the data. All I'm saying is we found notable statistically significant differences between these two groups. Our next research project will be to figure out, if you all start doing this, can we make you a non-progressor? And if you change your mind and start doing that, will you start progressing faster? Is where we're headed next. But for right now, all I'm telling you, who are the success stories and who are the people doing terribly and what's different between them. So there is this study is available online. It's on my website. We can post a link to it. But this is a peer-reviewed publication that sums up the foods and supplements associated with faster and slower Parkinson's progression. It is available, it's freely available, but the data I'm going to share with you today has since been updated. Remind me to talk to you about the partners who play for points. But this is what the answer key looks like. So this website, livinghealthywithparkinsons.com, is where we have posted all of the updated answers. And when the 2021 data becomes available, that is where we will post the updated answer key. I'm going to give you a sneak peek at a little bit of some of it today. But this is what the data shows. Let me see if I have a close-up here. Okay. So this is just another way of looking at it, but for those of you who may not be catching on to the concept, what we are seeing is that there are foods that seem to be associated with people who do exceptionally well, and foods associated with people who do poorly. So let's talk about it from a couple different angles. First of all, how you eat might be just as important as what you eat. First thing I want to say is food scarcity is a huge problem, probably at financial insecurity in general. Of all of our data, what seems to be have the variables associated with the most rapid rate of progression are being poor, being lonely, not getting a good night's sleep, and not exercising. Food is really hard to put into that equation because it's not black and white. Everyone's eating. But among black and white variables, those are the big ones. So you can see here, people who have difficulty affording groceries in general and healthy food in particular have a easily measured faster rate of Parkinson's progression. People who cook most of their own food, try to prepare meal for others, avoid artificial colors, flavors, and sweeteners. People who try to buy from co-ops and farmers markets, buy local and seasoned to the extent that you are able, and who eat organically grown food when possible. We can measure them statistically doing better over time. These data have all been adjusted for age, gender, year since diagnosis, and income. So what that means for the non-statisticians in the audience is if you had another person just like you, same income bracket, same gender, diagnosed the exact same time as you, all those things being equal, the person who tries to eat organically grown foods when possible is on average about 86 points better off than you are on the Pro-PD score. And notice that I didn't say I always eat organically grown food all the time. I said I try when possible. I don't think anyone needs to be A+. I don't think you should get all stressed out about cheating. I think it's not always possible to afford or obtain organic stuff, and not everything needs to be organic. The Environmental Working Group has a great list of the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 that every year they kind of update and tell you what you should prioritize. So even though we have probably 15, 20 studies that say people who are exposed to pesticides are more likely to get a diagnosis of Parkinson's, these are the first data that suggests that once diagnosed, people who work to avoid pesticides seem to have slower rates of progression. So foods associated with symptom progression over time. The more fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, nuts and seeds, non-fried fish, wine, olive oil, coconut oil, and fresh herbs a person eats, the more likely they are to be on the slower progressing list. The 2021 data looks like it will also include green and black tea, soy, eggs, and frozen fruit. The people who seem to have among the people with the fastest progressing disease, they are eating statistically more out of cans, specifically canned fruits, canned vegetables. The next round of data says all canned stuff. So people have been asking, what about beans? What about fish, canned tuna, things like that? It appears that that is coming up on this next list. Soda, especially diet soda, fried food. And there's, we won't get into explanations yet. Fried food, dairy, specifically ice cream, yogurt, cheese, milk, and butter will be on the next list. Beef, pork, and chicken, drinking out of plastic bottles, pasta, and bread will be on the 2021 list. And so I am not saying that you can never, ever, ever have a bowl of pasta again. People are all they're going to be, I promise someone's probably already written the question, what about gluten-free pasta? What about quinoa pasta? Everyone wants to know wine. What about red or white? I mean, please join this study so we can answer those questions for you, is my first response. And the more people who enroll in this study, it's like a microscope that is starting to be fine-tuned. Now that we know where the fish are biting, we can kind of hone in a little bit and look a little closer and get some of those answers for you. But what we set out to do was just kind of cast a wide net and say, can we identify the things that the fast progressors are doing differently than the slow progressors? Just looking at it another way, I tried to make it so that, I think a year or two ago, I turned these into refrigerator magnets, and every patient who came to my office, I made them go home with a magnet to hang on the refrigerator so I could haunt them every time they went to the kitchen. this is pretty, I put a lot of work into this for a paper that I'm currently writing. But what this is I did a comparison between, these are the 4 diets. We'll call this the pro, I'm calling this the pro diet just for, because I don't know what else to call it right now, but the diet based on the patient reported outcomes in Parkinson's. What I've just told you about here today, this top line represents what our data shows. The people who are eating these foods tend to be doing the best. And so these are the 4 types of special diets that have been linked to Parkinson's disease, doing better or worse in Parkinson's disease. And what I try to do is just kind of compare them. You know, there's data that says people who eat the Mediterranean diet are less likely to be diagnosed with Parkinson's, or if they're diagnosed a few years later, implying that it might slow progression. Same, we've talked a little bit already here today about the ketogenic diet. And so, you know, there's a lot of overlap. What I'm trying to say here is I don't think that the Mediterranean folks and the Mind folks need to start fighting over whose diet is best. I don't think that this is a matter of the pro diet versus the Mind diet. You can see some themes. And I just wanted you, for those of you who are making real life decisions, what do I have for breakfast? What do I have for lunch? What I would do is the ones for which there are pretty solid themes. I see no reason to limit for fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, nuts and seeds, seafood, wine, and olive oil are pretty darn consistent among all the diets. A fruit is going to throw you out of ketosis, wine probably also. But so there are some themes here. Pretty much every scientist that's ever looked at the topic of nutrition, diet, and Parkinson's is saying that there seems to be some protection here. The discrepancies over here are either because people didn't look, or that's where we start. You know, a lot of people did not ask about spices. No study before ours has ever looked at organic or non-organic. So it's not that these disagree with that, they just never asked that question. Same thing down here, red meat, pork, chicken, dairy. You know, these are pretty consistently coming up as the things you should avoid. But there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And there are some of you who really, 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 really love your sweets and say, I only am going to give it up if there's a lot of data, very, very compelling data that I need to. But this is the state of the science here. This is kind of my attempt at pooling everything that's been done so far on nutrition and Parkinson's outcomes over time. Dairy is probably where I get the most pushback. After I give this talk, I have a whole bunch of questions. Well, I only eat organic milk, or mine is all grass-fed, or mine's not pasteurized, or what about goat milk? What about camel milk? And there are, I believe, 5 studies now that has suggested the more dairy any human consumes in midlife, the more likely they are to be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And once diagnosed, our data clearly says Parkinson's is progressing. And I emphasize clearly because we're not asking about dairy. We individually said, hey, do you put butter on? Do you eat butter? And butter came up a yes. Yogurt came up a yes. Ice cream came up a big yes. Like cheese came up a yes. Our data is in line with all of the other studies that have been done on dairy and Parkinson's, suggesting there's something about dairy that is conferring a risk of both diagnosis and progression. We have yet to do a study that says if you stop eating dairy, will it improve your outcomes over time? That study has never been done. There is a lot of question about why. Some people, the toxicologists, neurotoxicologists seem to think it's that the pesticides are getting into the food that the cows are eating, and then it gets into the breast milk of the cows. And so it's really a pesticide issue, not a milk issue. Other people think, the GI folks think that cow breast milk is actually introducing some organisms, a cow microbiome into our intestinal tract, and seeding kind of a dysbiosis. You know, every time you drink the breast milk of a mother cow, you're now giving yourself the microbiome that belongs in cows. And so that could be part of where we're seeing this dysbiosis. Some people think it's a lactose intolerance. We now know that the human body makes alpha-synuclein in response to intestinal inflammation. So if you're lactose intolerant, even if you don't mind being a little gassy or a little bloated, It might be that your intestinal tract is fighting a war, and that inflammation is resulting in misfolded alpha-synuclein. Some people's, there was before this webinar started, somebody asked a question about calcium for osteoporosis. Some people think that it's the high calcium that's actually doing the damage. And so we don't know why. And I'm going to tell you, I don't think you should wait for us to understand the why. This is 2021. I'm in Seattle. The PD Active is in Northern California. There's not a grocery store around that doesn't have at least 10 different milk alternatives. You have your choice of soy milk, rice milk, hemp milk, almond milk, hazelnut milk, rice milk. I mean, there are so many dairy alternatives in this day and age. I can't see any good reason to continue consuming dairy now that we have 5 very compelling studies that say the more dairy you eat, the more likely you are to get Parkinson's. And 2,500 people who have participated in this survey, and the data seems clear, the more dairy you eat, the faster it progresses. And I'm from Northern Michigan. I like dairy too, trust me. I mean, this isn't, and I will tell you, I'm coming in with a little bit of a bias too, because before I started specializing in Parkinson's, I spent 10 years focused on MS. And there's this whole body of research that a link between dairy and multiple sclerosis. There's actually an immune-based thing where your immune system attacks the myelin in your central nervous system, and there's a protein in dairy that exactly matches a protein on your myelin. And people with MS are more likely to have dairy allergies. So when their immune system responds to the cream in their coffee, it also starts attacking their spine. So in MS, there's this issue between dairy and MS for immune-based reasons. And so then when I came over to the Parkinson's world, I was already kind of familiar with how many ways there were to avoid dairy and how unnecessary a food it actually is. So I said, everybody wants a loophole for this one. This is where, when I go for the protective foods, the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, the seeds, the olive oil, nobody ever doesn't believe my data. In fact, they will often say, duh, you spent all that time to learn that vegetables are good. That's stupid. What a waste of time, obviously. And then I come over to the foods associated with faster progression. And it's when I tell people ice cream, that's where they start, I never believed that stupid study. So, just be aware of your own biases. I've already harped on this just because 2 things go together. I am not telling you that your foods are causing your progression. I'm just saying the people who are progressing faster are eating certain foods. So you all want to know, does it matter? I'm going to say don't wait. Don't wait for a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. This has the updated foods. The peek at the 2021 variables looks like this is what we are seeing. These are the foods that I'm going to tell you. The foods on the left, you should drown yourself in. The foods on the right, I would make them not a part of your life routinely. A couple little tips about this. Don't go too far too fast. It's easy to do this for 2 or 3 days. And if you're not prepared, you don't have a plan, you get frustrated around day 3 or 4 and say, forget this is too hard. That's not what I want you to do. I would rather you go slow and steady and make sustainable changes that can be gradual and fun. One of the best things, I have a couple who taught me this trick, and I think it's absolutely brilliant, but they play for points. And the person who eats the most of these foods each day doesn't have to do the dishes at night. And I started doing it with my kids. We have the rule at my house, whoever eats the fewest, I don't get to count wine points. But the person who eats the fewest of those over the course of the day has to do our dishes at the end of the day. It's great. It's like a parenting win no matter what. I either don't have to do the dishes or I get smart, healthy kids. So find a way to make the emphasis on ways to encourage the good foods. Don't dwell on all the stuff you're not supposed to eat. It is really easy to go through the grocery store and like, oh, Laurie says not to eat that either. Laurie says not to eat that either. That's not what I'm not trying to take away all your favorite foods. I'm trying to get you so full on the good stuff that you don't have a lot of room for the bad stuff. Coming up with a meal plan helps. Being a creature of habit can help, especially at the beginning. Find a couple breakfasts that you like. Oatmeal with a cut up apple and some cinnamon. You get the apple point, you get the cinnamon, the spices point. A smoothie. You know, I had oatmeal today and with 2 bananas, a handful of greens, some frozen black cherries. Oh, and I put a quarter cup of walnuts in there, right? But I probably got 8 servings of fresh, 8 to 10 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables in my morning smoothie. So start trying to find ways to kind of stack the deck in your favor. It is so easy to start adding more herbs and spices to what you're eating. I mean, they're easy to grow in your kitchen. They're easy to keep alive. People think that fresh herbs cost a lot of money. It actually is fairly easy to keep a rosemary bush around. I planted a bay leaf tree that has been one of, easy, so easy to just run out to the yard and grab a couple leaves. And that's one of the bigger changes I've made. It's been easy to make. So in terms of the avoids, there are probably a couple. Everyone's looking at this list, and there's, for that person who's sitting there saying, well, I never eat soda. Somebody else is saying, well, I never eat canned vegetables. Great. Cross those off the list and then tackle one more bullet point for the next 2 months. Just get it off the list. For people who are resistant to change, they don't know, they're not convinced that it's going to be worthwhile. The other way to do this is I ask people to give me 2 months. I'll have them go to the Pro PD, get their Pro PD score, and I will say at some point, it doesn't matter when, but you pick your 60 days, 2 months where you're strict. For 2 months, pick 2 very strict months where you do not touch one of the foods over here, and you load up on all of these foods over here and take your Pro PD score at the beginning, middle, and end and watch what happens. And I think I can say I have yet to see somebody who makes it to the 60 days, who does the experiment, who doesn't say, I feel better, I'm going to keep going. If you don't, if you've given up all your favorite foods, you don't feel any better, go back. But again, I'm not telling you this because I think it's going to help a lot of your symptoms today. I mean, it's probably going to help your constipation. Your bowels will certainly be moving if you're eating these foods. A lot of meat and dairy are very, very constipating. So to that end, some of your meds may be working better, but I'm actually surprised at how much of a quality of life boost there is, that enough people are going to say, I clearly feel better, I'm going to keep going. Because I'm not telling you it's helping your symptoms, I'm telling you that scientifically, this is what the data looks like. If I were designing a how can we slow progression study, this is what I would have people eat, and this is what I would have people avoid.
Dr. Mischley, quick question in there.
Yeah.
Not seeing one of my favorite food groups, beer.
If it's not listed, it's neutral. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't help.
Yeah, I'm joking, but alcohol is, in general, is not either one or the other, huh? Except for wine.
Yep. No, liquor is neutral, beer is neutral, wine is medicine.
Got it.
All right. Supplements. So this is ethically questionable that I'm going to get into this, but I'm excited about these data. I just got this yesterday. Nutrition, not all nutrition can come from food, and vitamin D is a perfect example. It is a nutrient. The definition of nutrition is something that a nutrient is something that humans need to survive. We cannot make ourselves, and therefore must obtain it from our environment. If it is essential for our survival and we need to obtain it outside of exogenously, it is a nutrient. Think of us as parasites of the planet, right? Our survival depends on taking resources from our environment. Air is a nutrient. Oxygen is a nutrient. We can't make our own. If we don't breathe, we die. So oxygen is a nutrient, water is a nutrient, sunlight is a nutrient. And so vitamin D is a perfect example of a nutrient we need that doesn't come from food. So nutritional supplements are something that I use in practice. It's something I believe levodopa is a nutritional supplement. L-dopa is something that the body naturally makes. We have, and people with Parkinson's just can't make enough. So you, for whatever reason, need to supplement yours. You have what we call a conditionally essential nutrient. There is a subgroup of this population who cannot make enough L-dopa to get their needs met. So they have to take an L-dopa nutritional supplement to make up for what they can't do on their own. And so the most successful win this field has ever had has come in the form of a nutritional repletion strategy. So, I'll just leave it there and say, I think there's more to come. I do think that we are going to find big wins with additional nutritional supplements. So this is preliminary, and both of these sets of data are wrong, but I wanted to bring your attention to them just so that we could kind of stimulate a conversation. I hope this is exciting to enough of you that many of you will go home and join the CAMCARE study when you realize how important every participant's participation is. But this is what we're learning. And yesterday I had a meeting. We're getting ready to release the 2021 data associated with faster and slower rates of progression for supplements. And I had two different statisticians look at these data using two different programs, and they both came up with very different they both did different lists, and they both did the stats a little bit wrong, but they're going to merge them and we're going to have the right answer. But I want to show you what the lists look like. So this person appropriately adjusted for what we asked is, are there any supplements associated with faster or slower progression? The ones in green are the ones that came up statistically significant. This is the number of additional pro-PD points for people who took iron or melatonin were faster progressing over time. And the curcumin, fish oil, N-acetylcysteine, CoQ10, oral glutathione, and low-dose lithium were associated with slower progression over time. What I like about how this person did their analysis was they compared 10 people who diagnosed 10 years ago to other people diagnosed 10 years ago in the same income bracket. This was adjusted for a lot of other things. So it's cleaner in some ways. But this statistician realized that the entire analysis is only valid if if there's a normal bell curve, right? If we have this, you have to, for these statistical equations to work, the curve has to have a normal distribution. And to get that normal distribution, you actually have to take the log of the pro-PD times 0.35. And so this statistician did that, but he didn't make any of the adjustments. So he compared newly diagnosed people 1 year out to people 20 years out. So these two will both learn from each other, and they're going to do the updated analysis, but I want to show you, it's kind of neat to see how many of these overlap. Fish oil appears to be protective on this one, low-dose lithium, N-acetylcysteine, homocysteine factories. These are the B6, B12, and folate that lowers homocysteine levels. Also found CoQ10 in turmeric, curcumin to be effective. Interestingly, DHEA and krill oil seemed to offer some protection, vitamin B12, coconut oil, vitamin C, and then associated with faster progression, we saw iron, also probiotics. That does not surprise me at all. I tell my patients no on probiotics. Ginkgo and edible marijuana came up as faster. So before you all start freaking out about a couple things here, let me tell you that we now have a couple. First of all, I told you both of these are preliminary, and neither of these are correct in and of themselves. We have some decisions to make where we have to say, does it make sense? It might be that edible marijuana is making this disease progress faster. It might be that people who are already progressing fast and not doing well are now looking for more desperate second tier, third tier strategies. The first line stuff didn't work. When I first saw this cannabis data, I was talking to one of my colleagues in Florida, and he said, of course, the only people who would ever use marijuana are the people who have tried everything else. I was like, not in Seattle. That's kind of first line where we are, right? And so there's this cultural shift. I mean, we have to try and interpret what some of this stuff means. Same thing with melatonin. This is really concerning to me, and because so many patients use melatonin and so many people claim it helps, and there's actually a pretty impressive body of evidence suggesting that melatonin has some neuroprotective properties. It's really surprising that melatonin keeps coming up associated with worse outcomes over time. What we previously did is we kind of tried to make sense of this. What could this mean? And there are already existing studies that say people with bad sleep have a faster rate of progression. And guess who's taking melatonin? People with bad sleep. So what we did is we looked at people with bad sleep. So basically, when you adjust for bad sleep, melatonin is no longer associated with faster progression. It looks like it's not melatonin making the disease progress faster, it's probably bad sleep. And in fact, among bad sleepers, the bad sleepers who take melatonin are better off than the bad sleepers who don't take melatonin. So it gets messy. And so I meet people every single day who are like, what should I take? And I just kind of want to give you all a behind the scenes peek at kind of what these data look like, how we come up with the data that we come up with, what's happening behind the scenes to kind of deliver something to you that is just tell me what to eat, just make it simple, tell me yes, tell me no. But I kind of wanted to have a little transparency and show you how messy some of this is behind the scenes as we try and bring you useful data.
It's fascinating stuff. Is there any timeline, Dr. Mischley, on when these might be merged and updated?
I'm trying really hard I've already nagged both statisticians this morning. So I'm hoping in the next month. I really was hoping we would have it in January, probably February at the latest. But here, I will just put in one more plug. This CamCare study, there's a slide in a minute. We turn in our annuals, we do 2 surveys a year. Anybody who's enrolled in this study, if you're not enrolled, please join. But we do new surveys in February and August of each year. And so if you enroll now, if you go home and enroll now, you'll be in the system, and then you'll also get the February and the August survey of this year. It's very, very, very helpful to us, especially those of you who are listening today and thinking that you might make some changes. What's the most valuable data to us are the before and afters. Don't wait until you get your act together to join the survey. It's really, really, really important that you join today, and then let us just follow you along as you make whatever changes you're going to make.
Right. And again, that's at www.propd.org.
That's to get your score. I'll show you this CamCare and PD at bastyr.edu. Right here is how to participate in this study, the bottom one.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll shut up in a minute and start taking questions. Or a couple more things I just want to say. Not all nutrients are molecules in minerals. I've already said not all of it comes in food, but it's even bigger than that. Community is a nutrient. Social health is a nutrient. And what we see in our ProPD data is that when we ask people in general, please rate how well you rate your satisfaction with social activities and relationships. The people who say my social satisfaction is excellent also happen to have the lowest ProPD score. Same thing with social performance. How satisfied are you with your social activities and roles? People whose social performance is highest are also the people with the lowest ProPD score. So again, this just gives us some confidence that this measure that we're using is useful. But this is where it starts to be mind-blowing to me. Every single symptom, 33 symptoms, balance, constipation, sleep, fatigue, erectile dysfunction, you name it, every single symptom is rated as more severe by lonely people over not lonely people. People who say, I am not lonely, on average, this is over the first 10 years after diagnosis, their score probably goes from a 400 to a 600. People who say, I am lonely, to a true false statement, I am lonely, starts at 1,000 and goes up to about 1,200 over the course of 10 years. And so when you just stop from a research perspective and think about how many millions of dollars we have put into molecules and pharmaceuticals and 1 milligram versus 2 milligrams and 3 times a day doses versus 4 times a day and inhaled versus swallowed. And we aren't even adjusting for things like this. In the statistical equations that we're doing, we are not even taking loneliness into account. This is this huge, huge variable that is polluting all of everything we are trying to do. And we're not even asking about it in clinic. We're not asking about it in research studies. And yet it is one of the biggest indicators of progression out there. And, I think, I just want to say, I think Alcoholics Anonymous is going to turn out to be, it is turning out to be a huge role model for me in terms of how I study and move forward with this disease. I think that AA is one of the only existing therapeutics in the healthcare system where social health is an integral part of the medicine. The daily meetings, the having a sponsor, having your tribe, finding your tribe within your tribe. Something about the social connection is actually medicinal, therapeutic. And I think that we need to learn from them because there's something there. And like I said, this is not really what I went into this study looking for, but it's what we ended up finding. Everybody is worried about a tremor, right? They see their tremor, it freaks them out, it bothers them, they're self-conscious about it, they go to the doctor and try and medicate it away. What are data? This yellow line looks at tremor and quality of life. Among people who have an excellent quality of life or a poor quality of life, tremor does not make much of a difference. Whether you have no tremor, a little tremor, or a severe tremor doesn't actually matter all that much in terms of your overall quality of life. What does matter? Look at loneliness. It is virtually impossible to have an excellent quality of life if you are lonely. Similarly, it is really hard to have a poor quality of life if you have a lot of friends. So as we move forward with this disease, we have spent the last 200 years walking around saying we need to find a cure for tremor. We need to find a cure for tremor. And I just want to shift our focus and say what we need to do is ensure that every single person with a diagnosis of Parkinsonism has an excellent quality of life. And I'm not sure that that's where the goalpost has been. Just to put it another way, we're trying to compare different behaviors. People who say they are lonely, being lonely is worse for you statistically than exercising 7 days a week is good for you. On average, a person who exercises at least 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week is about 300 points better off than the person who doesn't exercise. However, a lonely person, if you are exercising 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week, and you're lonely, it's as good as doing nothing. So this is not intended to be a depressing conversation. This is, I'm not naturally an exerciser. I love the idea that I can make more friends way easier than I can increase my exercise, right? Find the parts that are appealing to you. There are so many opportunities to do things that seem to all contribute to a higher quality of life. Let's use them. If you can exercise with friends, PD Active plug right there. If you can exercise with friends, talk about effective, efficient, right? That's bang for your buck. You just went to your exercise class and crossed 2 of the most potent interventions that you could possibly do off your list. So here's kind of just to sum this all up. This blue line is real data. This is what the average rate of progression looks like. And if we were to improve someone's symptoms, but not affect progression, this is what it would look like. Still better off, but it's not changing progression over time. What I'm a little more interested in is this decreased slope. This is what a 50% decrease in slope looks like, right? And so it's good. Over time, the earlier you get started, the more powerful slope reduction becomes. But again, even this, 25 years into the disease, you're not doing as well as I want people to do. what we're looking for, where there's real power, the potential is both. If we can find things like levodopa and exercise, it's very does provide symptom relief. If we can do things like meds and exercise to reduce symptoms, and these other things like friends and exercise and diet that seem to possibly be influencing progression, we open the door to an entirely new paradigm for what PD progression looks like over the next 20, 30 years. This is the website for the study. Please, please, please consider joining. It's something every one of you can do today that will meaningfully contribute to us getting the updated answer key in the next couple months. This is Living Healthy with Parkinson's is the website where we post the data once we have it. And then Online Parkinson's School is a course I'm teaching that kind of goes into deeper detail about a lot of the things that we've talked about here today. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Wow, that's terrific, Dr. Mischley. That's just so much valuable information. It's so challenging to know where to begin and unpack all that, but let's just dive right into our questions. I know we've got a lot. I'm looking at 61 questions here, so so good luck to us. Some of them will probably have been covered, so Sue and I will probably tackle these one at a time, and the best we can filter out those that have been answered, we will. We'll start right in with one from Jodine, who asks about NAD, and you'll need to, for the neophytes like me in the group, define NAD, but why were NAD infusions practiced for PD in the past? Secondary question, why have they been abandoned or discredited? And are there circumstances in which you would still prescribe NAD?
Yeah, so NAD is a molecule that is involved in mitochondria working well and right. And we do have reason to believe that there's some mitochondrial impairment in Parkinson's. Cellular energetics are compromised. I'm doing a Michael J. Fox funded study right now at the University of Washington in the Department of Radiology. And we are looking at muscles of people with Parkinson's disease to see if their NAD production is as robust as an age-matched control without Parkinson's. So it has not been dismissed. And in fact, shout out to Michael J. Fox Foundation for funding this study. And we are very much actively investigating it. It was used historically to try and improve overall, probably overall progression, but fatigue was where we saw an improvement. There have been a couple old studies, 80s maybe, where there was a little improvement in fatigue in people who took an NAD supplement, and especially in California, for whatever reason, IV NAD treatments, which are very, very expensive, have become quite popular, but it's not that they have been dismissed, it's that the conventional body of scientists is very uncomfortable with the rate at which docs are making it available to patients. And it's one thing if you say, hey, I'm eating more broccoli to try and slow my Parkinson's. People don't get too worked up about that because the side effects of broccoli aren't that big a deal. When your physician hears, hey, I just wrote a check for $8,000 for a series of 6 IV NAD treatments, the alarm bells go off because there isn't really good science that says that's going to do something useful. And we're afraid that people are the side effect is financial, and it's not cheap.
Good.
Another question that came in is, you talked about not eating dairy, but somebody wanted to know about calcium supplements. Are they beneficial or not for Parkinson's?
And I'll tag onto that gluten.
Yeah. So the calcium one is a lot harder to answer than the gluten one. And it is true that calcium deficiency is horrible for your bones. It is also true, there is very, very, no evidence that a person who already has osteoporosis or osteopenia can start taking calcium supplements and make their bones stronger. I mean, truly, if one, I agree with everybody who has ever been prescribed a calcium supplement. It is very, very, very important to make sure that your diet has adequate amounts of calcium in it. So for a person who eats green leafy vegetables and almonds and seaweed and tofu that's packed in calcium carbonate, they're getting plenty of calcium and they probably do not need a calcium supplement. In fact, I have some concerns that we've gone a little overboard with the calcium supplements, and that could be part of a problem. We're studying calcium channel blockers because we actually think blocking some calcium might have some therapeutic value. So what I don't agree with is this, oh, bones take more calcium, bones take more calcium. It just doesn't work like that. Every person needs to have kind of a well-trained nutritional evaluation with their prescribing doc to figure out if calcium is more likely to hurt them or help them. But just because you have weak bones does not mean you need to start taking a ton of calcium, but some of those people need to be. Gluten, we don't know. About 5% of people, there was one study that looked in a neurologic clinic, and 5% of people with Parkinson's disease had antibodies to wheat, to gluten, had actual celiac disease. There is at least one publication in the literature of Parkinson's disease, celiac disease misdiagnosed as Parkinson's. An 80-year-old man who had high homocysteine was referred to a GI doc. The GI doc tested him for celiac disease, and 8 months later on his gluten-free diet, all his symptoms were gone. So that tells us, we know that among people with celiac disease, neurologic symptoms are often the first symptom. It can be migraines, it can be balance issues. It has been shown to be tremor. It's not that common, but it could be. So there might be a few people, 1, 2, 3, watching this who actually do have undiagnosed celiac disease, but that's not going to be the case for most of you. What I hear in clinic is I've tested people, they don't have antibodies, but over and over, I hear people tell me, I don't care if it's celiac or not. I know that when I eat wheat, I get sleepy, my fatigue is worse, my heartburn comes back, I get GERD, I get reflux, and my hemorrhoids come back. Those are the things that I hear in clinic. Fatigue, heartburn, hemorrhoids are probably the 3 most common things that people will tell me got better when they gave up wheat. So maybe that's placebo. Maybe patients know something the researchers don't, but I honestly, our data says bread and wheat are associated with worse outcomes. Those are also cheap processed foods with a lot of the nutrients removed. I don't know that there's something bad to them, or they could just be taking up the space that could go to something better. So we don't know. It's a long-winded, I don't know.
Well, there's still a lot of I don't know in this game of PD, but you're covering a lot of those bases. I have a question here from Terry, who's questioning the delta between fish oil and fish specifically. And I don't remember where in your advised versus discouraged fish falls, but she has switched from flaxseed to fish oil based on your own suggestion. That's great. But also understands that fish is valuable in the diet. And is she hurting herself, or are we hurting ourselves by not including fish in our diets? If we're also taking fish oil.
If you're taking fish oil, you're probably covering your bases, would probably be my guess.
Good, simple, quick answer.
Catherine had asked about canned fruits and vegetables. Is it the lumen can or the BPA lining that's causing the problems?
I posed that question in Memphis. I was speaking at University of Memphis, and I said, I can't figure out if it's the aluminum in the can or the BPA in the lining. And the host of the conference said, I bet you it's neither. It's the most heavily sprayed fruits and vegetables with pesticides are the ones that wind up in cans. Mm-hmm. And so there are so many questions here. I don't know. I've tried, and I'll tell you, I'm a food snob. When I saw those data, my first thought was, I'm so glad I never eat fruits and vegetables out of cans. And then, I'm go out and get takeout Thai food the next day, and I realize I'm picking up my Thai food and I see all the coconut milk cans lined up. All the coconut milk I'm consuming is coming from a can, and a couple of days later I was cooking something that required stewed tomatoes or something like that, and I got a can of stewed tomatoes out, and I went out for a drink with some friends and I ordered a pineapple juice drink, and I saw the canned pineapple juice. And even if I'm not doing it at home, I'm realizing how often canned stuff was making it. My vice is eating out. I do not eat. I like to eat out. And so I started to realize all the places cans can start to slip in. Beans are where a lot of people get it. So we don't know, but I'm trying to do more at home. I bought myself what do you call those big scary pressure cookers that everyone uses now?
Instapot.
Instapot. That's why I bought the Instapot, was I could make my own beans. I've had it for 2 years. I've not yet made beans with it, but that was the plan. But yeah, getting away from cans in general, and I don't know why, but I'm trying.
Yeah, beans are definitely a source in our family of the canned food problem. So making our own beans could be interesting and fun and helpful. Chris asks, this may be a bit of an edge case, but I don't want to assume that, so I'll ask it. Chris says, I have atypical PD and don't take any meds. Do your comments on diet still apply?
We don't know. Good question. We have surprisingly few, a disappointing number of people with atypical Parkinson's in this study. You are invited to participate. And I tried to ask my statisticians to answer this question for people with MSA, PSP, other non-Parkinsonian forms. And it was really disappointing. I think there are maybe 4 people with MSA in the study, 1 with PSP. So one of my goals for 2021 is to ask more people who don't have idiopathic Parkinson's to please enter this study so that I can more accurately answer that question if you invite me back here again next year.
We will.
I have some questions about acids. What about grapefruit juice? Another person asked about meprazole for stomach acid. Is that good or not? And what about vinegar in lieu of lemon juice or ascorbic acid?
Yep. So there's this neat chart in the, it's actually in the book behind me, but the short answer is no. Grapefruit juice, vinegar orange juice are not acidic enough to do the trick. It has to be lemon, lime, or ascorbic acid in terms of the pH. What I will tell you is I kind of, after I read those studies, got on a little pH kick and was going around to everything in my life looking for other low pH, foods that had that same low pH. And a lot of patients take a magnesium supplement called Calm. It's CALM. It's a powdered magnesium supplement. A lot of people take it at bedtime. It helps with morning bowel movements. And I was shocked at how acidic that was. That is as acidic or more than lemon juice. And so I think that if you have some of that Calm powder at home, that should probably work as well. And yes, people who are taking medicines to block acid like omeprazole, definitely bad news. You need your stomach acid. Stomach acid not only breaks all of your food into smaller parts so that you can digest them, the stomach acid activates all your pancreatic enzymes. It allows your nutrients to be absorbed. That's a much bigger can of worms. And omeprazole and the antacid drugs are really only intended to be short-term prescriptions until you can figure out lifestyle stuff to stop the reflux. People and those drugs are associated with increased risk of dementia. So if you have been on one of those drugs for any period of time, talk to your physician about a plan to try and come off. And that has to go slow, and there's a rebound. I mean, that's not, don't just stop. You will have reflexive reflux. So don't do that without some supervision and a plan.
Right, and then related to that, I was a little bit surprised to hear you say that you discourage, or they're on the no list, probiotics. I mean, I used to be I do suffer from excessive acid problems, and so I used to be a stockholder in Tums, and I realized that was a bad approach to take. So I switched over to probiotics. Tell us a little bit more about why that's the case and what is a good natural solution.
Yeah, so we know for sure that the gut in Parkinson's is messed up. Like when we look at the organisms growing inside of the intestinal tract of Parkinson's, it's clearly different than healthy controls. And a couple of years ago at PD summer school, it's taken us almost 1.5 years to get these data. But what we did is we actually genetically identified all of the organisms growing in the guts of people with Parkinson's, and we are comparing them to a national database of what normal looks like. The first thing I will tell you is each person on average had about 5.7 million different genetically distinct organisms growing in their gut. So anybody who tells you, we had to call in a PhD microbiologist who didn't know what half this stuff was. right? So anybody who comes to the table telling you, I'm sure you need more lactobacillus and I think you need more bifidobacter, it's kind of a joke, right? Because there are already 100 or 200 probiotics that we know of, and there are 8 that are being sold to you over the counter. And our data suggests that people with Parkinson's already have too much lactobacillus and bifidobacter. And I think this is especially notable because at the World Parkinson Congress last year, somebody else presented data showing that people with Parkinson's had statistically more lactobacillus and bifidobacter than what was considered normal. So I do see a day where a Parkinson's probiotic will possibly come into play. I think that restoring some normalcy to the intestinal microbiome has tremendous therapeutic potential. I bet you that that probiotic supplement looks nothing like the ones that are sold over the counter generically to typical people.
Interesting. Okay, fingers crossed for a PD-friendly probiotic.
There's a question that came in about bread. Do you differentiate between whole grain and white?
We do on the study that's currently running. So if you join now, we should have that answer by the end of this year.
Join the study, another good reason. Dr. Mischley, I know you didn't go too deep into CDP choline, but I do have Karen asking if any others out there experience migraines when starting CDP choline. I've tried twice to take it with the same result.
If other people want to answer who might be listening, you know, the floor is open. You can type a comment in the thing. It's certainly not something I hear very often. And I will say that the benefits, you really need to get up to the 3 or 4 pills a day to fully appreciate the benefits. I just this week had somebody who's been taking 3 pills a day for years and never noticed anything, and got up to 4 pills a day in, you know, after a couple of weeks, called me, oh, terribly dyskinetic, very over medicated, and they just could not believe what a difference. I mean, 3 pills a day did not seem to potentiate their dopamine meds. As soon as they went up to 4 pills a day, they were terribly over medicated, which means it's working. And then they could reduce their levodopa by 30%. And they went on, that worked.
Okay.
As far as dairy, what about goat cheese or goat and sheep? Do those count?
If you are above the age of 4, you should not be consuming breast milk from any species, is my educated guess. But the data does not say that. We do not have enough people eating sheep, goat, camel milk to be able to say a difference. But it'll be another, I don't, you know, you need a lot of people consuming those foods to be able to detect the difference. And right now we are asking, we're not seeing it.
Yeah, and your against that is based again on the existence of pesticides too much.
I don't think it's pesticide. I don't think we have, I don't believe that there's no reason to believe that goat milk and sheep milk are that different than cow milk. Yeah, you know, I'm just guessing. I'm guessing. You can, I always joke with my patients, and I pretend like I'm smoking. I say, yeah, but mine are roll your own, what are those cigarettes, like the hippie ones with no pesticides, like the, you know, but the data says your cigarettes cause cancer. I smoke menthols. Like, you know, like maybe it might be that menthols are a get out of jail free card, but, you know, I'm kind of going to put it all under the tobacco smoke category. Like, you might be able to argue that A1 cows or goat milk or organic non-pasteurized milk is somehow a loophole to the data. But with 5 studies saying the more dairy you eat, the more likely you are to get Parkinson's, and every type of dairy we're asking about being associated with faster progression. Until compelling data comes up otherwise, I'm just going to say, just be done with dairy.
Good. And we're not proposing and condoning cigarette smoking here on this program.
even though it protects against Parkinson's.
Question here from Heidi. What about avocado oil? Was that, I can't remember if that was featured in your...
It is, I think it's on the survey. I don't believe it's coming up significant. If you Google news and avocado oil in the last 6 weeks, a study came out. I don't remember who, maybe Environmental Working Group or somebody like that, but the numbers were pretty astonishing. I think they sampled 20 some different types of avocado oil, and over 80% of them were adulterated. They didn't even have avocado in them, or it was cut with canola oil, or it was pretty bad. But it just made news in the last couple months. I don't have my numbers straight, but I am now, every time I go to the grocery store and I see avocado oil, I hesitate to even believe that it is avocado oil based on this study that just came out.
Wow, that's eye-opening.
What about Beano? Does it have any correlation with PD?
The enzyme? The enzyme that people take to not get gassy with beans, Beano?
Yes, I think that's what they're referring to.
I've never heard of a connection like that. We're not asking about it. If they know something. The other thing that I will tell you is on this CanCare study, we ask you all these questions: true, false, pick your, do you have friends? All these questions. And then at the end, we have a blank box that says, is there anything else you want us to know? That is so valuable for all of you who have learned things. Oh, you know what? I noticed that if I clench my body real quick for a second and kicks my meds in. I have a patient who swears if he eats a turkey sandwich, it'll kick his meds on. I mean, I can't, everyone has their story. Everyone's learned their little tricks. We want you to tell us those tricks. If you have learned something about something that works for you, something that hurts you or helps you, when you enter it into that box, it becomes data that we can use to go ask other people if they're seeing it too. When you ask it in this form, it's interesting, but one, I'll probably forget it. I don't remember who asked. When you enter it into that final box, is there anything else you want us to know? It becomes data that we put into play. So please be very generous with what you tell us about what you have learned, your hacks that you've discovered.
Good. I am going to repost, thanks to Rick Stevens, who put in the full URL to your study. I'm going to repost it again in the comments.
Right.
Sue, why don't you find another question for the doctor, and we'll...
A question comes in about the consumption of water. Is there any limits, or just drink as much as you can tolerate?
Yeah, one of the earliest symptoms of Parkinson's disease actually is the inability to recognize thirst. It's a nurse's health study. There's a study in the nurse's health study that says 18.8 years prior to diagnosis, they already identified a subset of people who were reporting less thirst, less water intake, and then greater constipation. And so what I try and tell patients is I'm not convinced, it's easy to say constipation is a symptom of Parkinson's disease, but we don't know chicken or the egg, what came first. If patients are experiencing less thirst, that might have led to the constipation in the beginning, right? And so I tell people that by the time you feel thirst, it's a later stage dehydration anyway. And people, you really have to train your body to drink enough water, whether or not you're thirsty. 1 ounce per kilogram body weight, I think, is the general recommendation. But what is more useful, what a lot of people will do is they'll get, a big Nalgene bottle type thing that they like, a water bottle, and put 4 rubber bands around it. And each time they finish one, they get to take a rubber band off. And so over the course of the day, you have to get all rubber bands off. Things like that tend to help. In our house, I have been, when you walk into a fancy hotel, they have the water jars with the fruit soaking in it. I have one of those at our house. And often in the morning when I'm brewing my coffee, I'm slicing lemon and lime and whatever fruit is the kids aren't eating, and I'll throw it into a thing of water. It's amazing how much more water everybody in the house drinks when there's a pretty water jug filled with fruits and vegetables and orange slices. And so that's an easy way to get more water in that tastes good. We make cocktails, like I'll get mineral water at Trader Joe's by the case and, put a splash of cranberry juice in there or something. And kind of make a mocktail. And that's another way to get a lot more water in. Fruits and veggies have a lot of water. Tea has water. But I do think that the dehydration problem is surprisingly, how many people go to their doctors complaining about constipation, and the Miralax is the first step. And it's not that Miralax doesn't have its role, but step one is let's increase water, let's increase fiber, let's get the constipating foods out of your diet, meat and dairy mostly, and let's get more fresh fruits and vegetables into your diet. And I will say most of the time, people's constipation will go away without needing to go to Miralax. So yeah, there's a huge problem with people with Parkinson's not drinking enough water.
Great. Donato asks, Dr. Mischley, what about associating magnesium to reduce calcium deposits in soft tissues like the brain?
Magnesium, it's a good question. Magnesium, I didn't see it coming up on the list of slow progression. There's no question people with Parkinson's tell me that magnesium tends to help with their sleep, their bowel movements, and some of their muscle tightness are the things I hear most often. Magnesium deficiency is a huge problem in the US, but just peeking at that data sheet we looked at, I don't know. I'm wondering now if I somehow missed adding magnesium on the list, or if magnesium is not coming up as something that is associated with better outcomes over time.
Fair enough.
Okay, question near dear to my heart. Thanks to Marjan for asking. Red wine or white wine? Any different?
I keep saying, if everybody who asked that question, if everyone who wanted an answer to that question gave $10 to this study, the study would be funded for the next 10 years. I mean, that is the number one question I get asked. We added that question, and it is in the ongoing, it's in this current survey. So if I'm invited back, I will have an answer for you next year.
Thank you.
Why not frozen vegetables? I remember seeing that on the discouraged list.
Good question. I mean, I'm the messenger. These are not my ideas. This is, that's, here's what I will say is my undergraduate work is in nutrition. My PhD is in nutrition. And there is this kind of inherent assumption that fresh is best, right? And so when I designed this study, my expectation, my hypothesis was that fresh green beans would be the best, frozen green beans would be second best, and canned green beans would either not be that great or they'd just be a little bit good compared to the other ones. But I came to the table with the assumption that all green beans would be good, but fresh would be better than frozen and canned. One of the biggest surprises for me in this entire data set was how canned foods are one of the worst things that you can put in your body. That was not a hypothesis I came to the table with. It's nothing I expected to find. And then once I saw that the frozen vegetables were also associated, like I trust the data. Like I said, all the protective stuff matches up with the same stuff we're seeing in Alzheimer's. I mean, the rest of these data makes sense. More exercise is better. So my first thought was that, yes, we are adjusting for income, but I still thought that poor people and people living in food deserts are more likely to be eating frozen vegetables. They're less perishable, and so even though we were adjusting for income, I thought maybe we weren't doing a good enough job controlling for some of these things that speak to rural living and food deserts and poverty. So that's one possibility. But then if I have a Dr. Laurie K. Mischley Facebook page, and on there I posted a video. One of my patients sent me a little expose that it was a news station on the East Coast did that talked about where your organic frozen vegetables are actually coming from. And, I'm not going to repeat the whole thing here, but you can go to the website and the video is posted and it's really eye-opening. I mean, after I watched it, I thought, oh, wow, maybe my data isn't wrong. And maybe there's, when I open a bag of frozen green peas, there's a lot more in there than the frozen green peas that I'm seeing. So I'd say go to that, watch that little news clip and make your own decisions.
Page.
It's Dr. Laurie K. Mischley.
On Facebook. If you search for that, they'll find it.
Yeah, the personal one will just get you pictures of my kids. The doctor one gets you legitimate medical stuff.
Good, fair enough.
Dr. Mischley, there are several questions on why no on probiotics. Could you address that, please, or any other comments?
Yeah, so I mean, other than what I already said, that in 2 studies that I'm aware of, ours and another one that was published at World Parkinson's, people with Parkinson's already had too much lactobacillus and bifidobacter. So even though I do think that the gut microbiome is abnormal, I don't think it's abnormal in the you need more lactobacillus and bifidobacter direction that most of the probiotics are based on. And then the other thing is, this is not fresh in my head now because the World Parkinson's Congress was 2 years ago now, 1.5 years ago. But what was striking to me is I remember coming home from the conference and there were 5 of us who spoke on microbiome, gut, nutrition, diet, something. And every one of us during the conference got asked by an audience member, what about probiotics? And it was interesting because every one of us gave a thumbs down, but every one of us did it for a different reason. And so, yeah, I just think it is so naive to think we understand what is going on in the microbiome. There are organisms that we have never heard of. We don't know what belongs there, what doesn't. The probiotics that are being sold are a drop in the bucket compared to what is actually growing in there. And so it's kind of like looking up at the solar system and like seeing the Big Dipper. It's like, hey, I know exactly what you need. You know, it is so much bigger than just the Big Dipper, right? Like just everyone calm down. There's a lot more to learn before we go in saying that you understand the solar system because you know where the Big Dipper is. So
good. So we've got about 5 minutes left. This has gone so quickly because it's so rich in content. And we've got a lot more questions to cover. So we will just ask a few more. We'll stop at 12:30 in respect to Dr. Mischley's time and everyone's. So a few more. I've got one here I'd like to ask that I'm curious about myself. Kathy asks, have you studied CBD use regarding the progression of PD? So I did see inhalables and edibles in your avoid list.
Yep. So I have had too many patients tell me how much cannabis involves their quality of life for me to, I'm very, very, very supportive of people with Parkinson's using cannabis because of the improvement in quality of life. And what I mean by that mostly is sleep. Yes, there are certainly some people, the rare person who uses it for tremor. I'm sure there's a fair share who think it helps their anxiety, their mood, their apathy. There's certainly that component of it. But really, truly, I'd say there is no more effective sleep aid for people with Parkinson's than cannabis. It is hands down the most effective sleep aid I have ever found for my patients, especially when combined with melatonin. CBD itself, I have not found to be too impressive. CBD plus THC, I think is quite impressive. There's a woman in San Diego for my patients who aren't comfortable experimenting on their own. There's a woman I refer a lot of my patients to in San Diego. Her name's Michelle Sexton. She's really good at dosing and ratios and CBD, THC, tincture versus gel versus cream versus a smoked, and kind of can help people kind of figure out what works best for them. What she will usually do is start people with a 5 milligrams CBD, 5 milligrams THC tincture at bedtime and have them take 1/8 of a dropper full the first night, first couple nights, and go up to 1/4 and then go up to 1/2 and just slowly inch your way up so that you don't ever get hit with too much and have the side effects that some people don't like, and just increase until you get a good night's sleep. And I think that has actually been pretty effective. I mean, I probably most weeks will have a patient who says, oh yeah, I met with Michelle Sexton a couple years ago and I've been sleeping fine ever since. And so once people get it worked out, I think it's a real game changer, but where I see it most helpful for people is sleep. And yes, our data does suggest that people who are using cannabis are in a faster progressing cohort. And I, as a scientist, need to keep a very open mind. And maybe this is one of these medicines that helps in the short term, but hurts in the long run. Or it could be one of these things where the people who are progressing fastest are looking for reaching out for more of the, are more likely to be turning to cannabis for help. Same thing like the melatonin. It's the people who are using the cannabis are the people who are having trouble sleeping. It's not really the cannabis, but the bad sleep. So we don't know where that falls. I'm not comforted by the fact, I don't like it being on that faster progressing list, but I'm not yet at a point where I'm willing to say you shouldn't. I'm saying, even though the data looks like that, I think melatonin and cannabis are still more helpful than hurtful for most people with Parkinson's trying to get a good night's sleep.
Right, but would you say that the faster progression element is due mostly to THC and that CBD would not? I mean, we don't know because the study
I
has.
don't have a clue. Mm-hmm.
All right, fair enough. All right, Sue, if you got one more.
Yeah, as far as social isolation, there are a few questions on this, especially during these times of COVID. Are people with more severe symptoms, non-mobile, dementia, et cetera, are they unable to maintain social relationships?
Sure, I'm sure it makes it harder. That's a really hard question because I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think people's concept of dementia is, it's easy to hear the word dementia and think things like Alzheimer's. And the cognitive decline that we see in Parkinson's disease isn't like that at all. I mean, there are people who are ridiculously socially active and engaged and smart and speak languages and recite poetry, but cannot draw a clock correctly or cannot fold a sheet and get the two corners to match up. So just because someone has a problem with spatial arrangement or executive function, their ability to communicate may not be impacted at all. So I actually don't think that cognitive decline is the biggest threat to social health in Parkinson's disease. I actually think probably being under-medicated is. I think people who are under-medicated are more, they don't move at the same pace as their friends. Cognitively, the connections come a little bit slower. And so you're in a group with 4 or 5 people, and even to participate in the conversation, you're keeping up. Cognitively, you know exactly what's happening, but by the time you find the words, you make the thoughts, you get it out your mouth, the conversation has moved on a little bit, and people find themselves just slowly withdrawing, right? They feel like they have less to say, they're not as heard, their opinion is not as valuable because the conversation's moving on without them, and it's not as easy for especially an under-medicated person to keep up at the clip, that especially if they're smart and their friends are smart, they talk quick, they think quick, that little delay in processing speed, it's not content, it's processing speed interferes with their ability to feel like they're part of the crew. And so I'd say if there's one thing about Parkinson's disease that is a real threat to social health, it's being inadequately medicated with your dopaminergic meds.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have one last one here, Dr. Mischley, and then we'll wrap. Heidi asks, do you offer telehealth services for us living in Canada? So this would apply probably to Europeans as well.
Yeah. I'm in clinic a couple days a week, and it's been really fun. My practice is very, very, very global, and it's been great because of Zoom has made it so now, this week I had somebody where my patient was in Austria, his wife was in Portugal, and they had one of their doctors in London on the call. And it really kind of is a taste of where medicine is headed. There's no reason we all need to be in the same room anymore.
Heidi is a volunteer for Impact Parkinson's Society in British Columbia. Would like to inform her clients about your amazing work! !
Great.
On that, let's bid adieu and say thank you very much again for your time. I'm so impressed with how quickly this went, falling firmly in the category of time flies when you're having fun and learning about yourself. So thank you very much, Dr. Mischley. Terrific content. To those that have asked questions and not had them answered, I'm very sorry. Please don't be frustrated. We've had a lot of questions come through. We hope we've addressed some of those that might span more users than just sort of one-offs, but we will be posting this. This is recorded, as I mentioned earlier on. We'll be posting this in the next 2 or 3 days at most on our YouTube channel. I will send out an email to all attendees, and if I can, all registrants, there's a difference there, with that link, and as well as a few of the important links that we've been pasting into the chat tool along through the presentation. So thank you everyone for your attending. Thanks, Sue, for your help. Thanks for Dr. Mischley for your time again. And everybody have a happy and safe new year. Cheers. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.